unit of class 12 economics. Introduction to macroeconomics. So first let us understand what is economics. Economics is the branch of social science that studies the production, distribution and consumption of goods and services. So what is production? It is manufacturing of goods and services by using the factors of production. Factors of production. Like land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. In distribution, whatever is produced is distributed in the form of rent, wages, profit, interest, like paying the factors of production. Land, we're paying rent, and then for labor, we are paying wages, and then for capital, we are paying interest, and entrepreneur we get profit. So in the distribution, we distribute the factors of payment. And then in the consumption of goods and services, it is we, the consumer, who buy goods and services to satisfy our wants. So in simple economy, it is you and I who wants to buy goods and services. The definition of economics is given by many economists. So it can be classified into four. One is Adam Smith. Adam Smith, who is also considered as the father of economics. He defined economics as the wealth of nation. Wealth of nation, which studies the nature and causes of the wealth of nation. Then too we have Alfred Marshall. He gave the welfare definition. Welfare definition. Economic as in study in ordinary business of life, how he acquires money and how he spends. And third we have Leonel Robbins. Leonel Robbins. He gave the definition, scarcity definition. He defines economic as a study of social behavior, which studies the ends and scarce, which have alternative uses. The fourth we have P.A. Samuelson. He emphasized on growth. Growth definition. Now the subject matter of economics can be divided into two branches, microeconomics and macroeconomics. Micro, it is derived from a Greek word micros, which means small. Whereas in macro, it is also derived from a Greek word which means large. In micro, it studies individual behavior, individual firm. For example, household income, individual income, producer supply, etc. In macro, it studies aggregates or total or economy as a whole. In macro, we don't study about individual behavior or individual firm, but we study about aggregates in total. Example like national income, employment, general price level, aggregate demand, aggregate supply, etc. and so on, and the list go on. Here it studies about aggregates or economy as a whole, whereas in micro it studies the individual behavior or individual firm. Now let us study some important points of macroeconomics. First, we have functioning of economy. This macroeconomics helps us in understanding the functioning of the complex modern economic system. And macroeconomics gives us the clue. It gives us the clue on how the economic system functions as a whole, and how the level of national income and employment is determined on the basis of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And then in the second we have it helps to understand microeconomics better. By studying the subject macroeconomics, it helps us to understand the subject of microeconomics better by simplifying, by studying the economy as a whole. In the third we have it helps us to achieve the goal of economic growth with higher level of GDP and higher level of employment. In the fourth, we have it helps us to solve economic problems like poverty, unemployment, or business cycles, etc. It helps us to bring stability in price. So it suggests to measures inflation and deflation in the economy. Now let us study the scope or subject matter of macroeconomics. Scope, which means area of study. In your syllabus, we are going to study 4 points. Theory of income and employment, theory of inflation, theory of economic growth, and theory of international trade. First, let us understand the theory of income and employment. Here we determine the level of income and employment and what are the factors responsible for these fluctuations. Yes, employment can be increased or decreased depending on the level of income or output produced in a country. So with a given level of capital, technology, and labor, your quality labor, a country's national income can be increased by increasing employment. So with a larger of income, the larger the level of income or product or supply in an economy, the larger will be the employment. So according to Keynes, the level of income and employment can be determined by the level of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Aggregate demand, which means a total money expenditure made on goods and services by consumers, producers, or government. And aggregate supply is the total goods and services produced in an economy. So by keeping constant or by remaining unchanged in the short run, according to Keynes, it is the fall in demand. Fall in demand that causes unemployment. Or involuntary unemployment. That causes involuntary unemployment. So what is involuntary unemployment? It is a person who is willing to work at a prevailing wage rate but do not get jobs. So according to Keynes, it is a fall in aggregate demand that causes involuntary unemployment, that causes unemployment in a economy. Now we will study the theory of inflation. Here we study how aggregate demand and aggregate supply determine the level of inflation and general price level. So inflation means a general rise in price level or increase in the cost of living. So when there is inflation, there is a decline in the value of money. So according to Keynes, inflation occurs when aggregate demand is more. So if the demand is more in the market than what is produced or what is supplied in the market, if the demand is more, then there will be an inflation where there is a rise in the price level. Now, in the third, we'll study theory of economic growth. Theory of economic growth. So economic growth is a sustained increase in production of goods and services or increase in real national income or per capita income. So economic growth raises the standard of living. So it has become an important policy or important goal for both the developed and developing countries. So in developing countries like India, the problems of poverty and unemployment can be solved by achieving the higher level of economic growth. Now, in the fourth point, theory of international trade. So our main concern here is what determines the balance of payment and what causes deficit in the balance of payment. There is deficit in the balance of payment when import is more than the export. Import is more than export. The balance of payment. So, balance of payment, it is a statement or record of economic transaction that is import and export made between one country's with the rest of the world. So what causes deficit in the balance of payment? It is when import is more than the export. It causes a deficit in the balance of payment. And this balance of payment is influenced by foreign exchange rate. So this foreign exchange rate is nothing but the rate at which the country's currency is exchanged for foreign currencies. So for example, like a consumer in India wants to purchase American products. This American company may not likely to accept the rupees. So he needs to uh, buy the dollars by selling the rupees in the foreign exchange market. So that he can purchase, so that he can get the American products. So after the trade is made, it is recorded in the current account in the balance of payment. Now let us study the emergence of macroeconomics. So first let us understand classical economists. Classical, it is a classical, which means a traditional in style, or it is based on a methods developed over a long period of time. So who are those classical economists? Classical economists are like Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Robert Malthus, etc. Those are the classical economists. We call it as a classical economists because they have the same ideology, same ideas. They believe in the existence of full employment. Full employment. So what is this full employment? All the resources all the capital or all the able-bodied person who are willing to work find jobs. So all the resources are employed. So the classical economists believe that there is a full employment in a free market in an economy. In the beginning, classical economists believes in the full employment prevailing in the economy. So this full employment is an able-bodied person who are willing to work, find jobs. So whoever wants to work, they can find jobs. And then when we say full employment, all the resources, the capital, the labor are fully employed in the production of an economy. And even if there is lapses or even if there is a failure in bringing the full employment or any deviations, it can automatically bring back the, it can automatically solve the problem of full employment because they believe in the full employment in the laissez-faire economy. Laissez-faire, where there is no government interference or minimal interference of government. So the classical economists believe in full employment and self-correcting nature, where they are free from government interference or minimal interference of the government. The belief of classical theory in the existence of full employment is based on the theory of Say's law, named after the 19th century French economist J.B. Say. So according to J.B. Say, supply creates its own demand. Supply creates its own demand. In other words, production and supply creates an equivalent demand for the product. So there can never be a problem of overproduction because when there is supply, there will be a demand. If supply equals demands, the economy is said to be in equilibrium as there is no overproduction and unemployment. Whatever is produced is consumed by the household as there is automatic adjustment between producers, that is supply, as there is automatic adjustment between producers and consumers. Therefore, there is no overproduction and unemployment. According to classical, there is no need for the interference of the government in the functioning of the economy. But in 1929, but in 1929 to 1933, when there was economic depression, a drastic fall in national income and employment due to fall in aggregate demand, which causes unemployment. So it was at this time the classical failed to bring to bring back the full employment as they mentioned in the classical economist, where there is self-correcting nature. So when there was a huge unemployment in a classical economist during 1929 to 30s, this classical economist failed to solve the problems of unemployment. It was at this time the 20th century British economist. Named John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes came into picture and he challenged the classical theory of full employment and said that in order to bring back the full employment, it is necessary for the involvement of the government interference in the economic depression. According to Keynes' law, demand creates its own supply. In Keynes' law, they say supply creates its own demand, but Keynes said that demand creates its own supply. So he emphasized more on demand. According to him, if there is a fall in aggregate demand, that means there will be an unemployment. According to him, lack of aggregate demand can cause involuntary unemployment of labor and unutilized productive capacities. The rate of inflation occurs when aggregate demand increases. So, according to him, full employment is unrealistic. According to him, government interference is required, unlike Say's law of market. So he put a new theory in his book, General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, published in 1936. General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. Therefore, Keynes brought a basic change regarding the theory of employment and income. So it is often said that Keynes brought a revolution in economic theory because he brought a revolution in the free market economy. So he is considered as the greatest economist in the 20th century. So this is all for Unit 1. See you in the next class.